Welcome to Fluency Jams, where your hosts, Steve and Aaron, gather notes from the real world of business and tech. We're talking with leaders and innovators who are making a difference, searching for stories that inspire, challenge, and educate. You're about to enter a dimension, not only of ideas, but of innovation, a journey where no podcast has gone before.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Fluency Jams, as we've named it. I'm Aaron, and I'm here with my co-founder of Fluency Digital, Steve Taylor, and we've got a wonderful guest lined up for today. Steve, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, partners in arms for sure. And I'm super excited for today's show because we've got Lee Zukor, who's going to be sharing a little bit about product and engineering with us. And I actually first met Lee when he was VP of e-commerce at Bluestem brand. Since then, he's gone on to lead product and engineering for a number of exciting companies. Lee, where has the journey taken you recently?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. And thanks for having me on this show. I really appreciate it. It's good to have a chance to talk with you both. I am currently doing consulting. I have a company called Super Velo because I love to ride my bike and it's super. Before that, I was running product and engineering at a company called Wild Alaskan Company, direct-to-consumer seafood. Before that, I was at Imperfect Foods. I have a passion for good, sustainable food. I was leading product and engineering there. It's a grocery delivery service focused on eliminating food waste. Before that, I ran the team at Sports Engine, product and engineering. Sports Engine is a youth sports tech company. And before that was Bluestem, where we met. So it's been a lot.
For sure. Yeah. That's awesome. So maybe for listeners who aren't deep in the weeds on this, you can give us a quick breakdown of what the product function is in an organization.
I think effectively product is about understanding business requirements and what users really need, then figuring out what to build based on those things and prioritizing that work. It involves things like strategy, alignment, a lot of alignment, prioritization. In some cases, it also is the delivery of a product. In some cases, it's not. But it's basically figuring out what to build and helping people understand why.
And what was the spark that brought you into the product?
I started my career as a technical writer. I have a degree in English, and technical writing was pretty frustrating. I was, writing about bad software, trying to help people figure out how to use it. For my career, I really wanted to figure out how do you actually create better software instead of trying to convince people to do better things. I moved to UX. From UX, I moved to leading engineering teams. From there, I joined a startup, and at a startup, you kind of get to do everything. There were only 6 of us, and that was the first time I moved from UX to product. I've done some version of that ever since. Part of what I love about it is the things I was just talking about, right? You get to really do a deep dive in both the business and in your customers, and then figure out what to build and then guide that delivery.
Interesting. So what was that startup with the 5 other guys that you started that with?
I've been at several startups. I've had my own. The first one was called Wise.com. I was at Best Buy for 9 years. The last 2 years were at Accenture. Best Buy outsourced its technology to Accenture in 2000. Accenture was not a great fit for me. I was much more interested in digital and newer industries that Accenture hadn't gone deep in yet. I found myself talking to a startup founder. Wise was attempting to rank products based on user and expert reviews. So it was basically like we would take all of the collective knowledge on the web, we would rank products, we would tell you which was the best one to use. And then over time, we figured out like this one is the best to use for certain functions. If you were looking for a digital camera and you wanted it specifically for sports and you wanted it to be small and you wanted it to be under $500, we could tell you what that product was.
It was all new then, right? I mean, it seems now, it's pretty commonplace. Everyone looks for reviews and user-generated information around products, but you were doing that, it sounds like long ago. So
yeah, and their Bazaar Voice was a big competitor, and there was a company called Power Reviews. I don't think they're still around, but anyway, we were part of this really exciting space. We got VC funding really quickly. I joined as the 6th employee, but then I left the company. When we took VC money, we had another year or so before they moved to California. I wanted to stay in Minneapolis and keep my family here.
I'm curious about this concept of healthy tension between product and engineering. From your experience, is this tension ever truly healthy?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When people talk about healthy tension, what they mean is that there's a product team and an engineering team. Product people think about features, and engineers think about new technologies and performance. The assumption when people talk about healthy tension is that you need one person who's focused on features, pushing for deliver more faster, and you need somebody else who's pushing for technology advancement and things that will keep the system performant and secure. My belief is that assumes a relationship that is broken, assumes a lack of trust, that people are incapable of understanding what it means to build a performance system and making trade-offs. It assumes that engineering leaders don't understand enough about the business to know that features are also important. So I think that the conversation is the wrong one. I understand what people mean by it. I do think you need different kinds of expertise, right? But for those teams to have tension just seems like the wrong approach. You want those teams to be completely aligned. And I'll give you an example. A great example I always think is when I work at Bluestem and at Best Buy and at Target, holiday is the biggest time of year. It's really important, right? And when you have a product team, they are thinking about, okay, what are all the things that we can launch in order to make sure that we make the most of this holiday season, right? You want to go in Black Friday with all of your best features. You want to do recommendations, whatever it is that will help you sell more things. I remember a conversation at Bluestem where we said, here are the features we want to build. We really want to get them out by Black Friday. And the person leading engineering, who's a good friend of mine, said, we can launch those things, but I think we first need to address some stability issues. And if we don't address the stability issues, then we're not going to be able to sell anything. His decision to root that conversation in selling, which was the thing that was important to the business, right? And my understanding of if I have all the features in the world, but the system is down, it's not going to do me any good. That is a conversation that everybody is capable of having. But when we set up this sort of engineers only care about this thing and product people, then we shortcut that. We're just assuming that there's not trust. We're assuming that there's not capacity to understand. I just don't think it's a healthy way to think about it.
Hey, that's awesome, Lee. I really like that example. So when these teams are butting heads, what's typically at the root conflict? Is it a misalignment on priorities, communication gap, or something else?
Yeah, I think trust is a huge factor. I think ego is a huge factor. When you're talking about people who lead teams, collaboration isn't always the first thing that comes to mind. I think there's a couple of things that are pretty core to organizations that could kind of help. One of them is goals. I think that too often there's a set of goals for product teams and a set of goals for engineering teams. If those things are not the same, it makes sense that people would have different interests, different approaches, and prioritize different things.
So just to be on the same page and having the same goals, I can't imagine alleviates everything, just when you talk about big egos, on both teams, but that in your experience, that seems to mitigate some of that conflict, butting heads.
I think all of that stuff you mentioned exists with everybody, right? Everybody has an ego. Everybody has a domain they think they're an expert in. Everybody has a way they think is the right way to achieve a goal, even if they have aligned goals. You have to acknowledge people are people and you're going to have some amount of conflict. I don't think it needs to be inherent in a role. I don't think it should be built in institutionally. Yes, it is true that when you have product leaders and engineering leaders who both agree on what the goals are, and they're aligned on that and they're marching towards the same thing, you will still have conflict. You will still have egos. You will still have, disagreements on priorities. But I think if you basically say, hey, this is the thing that's most important, this is what we're working towards, then you're in a fundamentally different place than, I'm the my roadmap and you've got your roadmap. Right?
Which ultimately you want to get to the same place. Yeah. Even if there's that conflict. And I think you make a good point. It's everywhere. It's not just in corporate environments, right?
Yeah.
You got to know how to navigate that, kind of like those soft skills.
The other one mentioned is product design, which is really fundamental to that process. I was telling Steven last week that I had a leader who said org charts are set up to put friction wherever you think the friction is going to be the least detrimental in your organization, right? Unless everybody reports to the same person, there's going to be friction in the organization. Yep. And your org chart is a way to think about that. And that actually helps me realize product engineering, marketing, product design, how do those things fit together?
Okay. So reducing as much friction. I mean, it seems, obvious and rudimentary.
Sometimes the obvious rudimentary stuff is the stuff that gets lost.
So, you've demonstrated that we need both product and engineering, right? And there is a path to trust along there. I'm curious if product should own engineering or vice versa. A lot of companies try to force that integration. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like in the last couple of years, as the market has been challenging, that companies have been uniting those roles. I think sometimes it's to save money. Sometimes it's to have a single voice. I think I've had that role because companies are interested in a single voice and making sure that people are aligned around goals, that there's one person who the CEOs can talk to if there's a challenge. I do not believe that those roles need to be combined. I will say my feeling about the way an organization should work and people should work together, I don't have the same feeling about who should own it. For me personally, I've often worked with other engineering leaders. As long as we're aligned, trusting, and respectful, we can deliver great things. Sometimes that's not the case, in which case having a single person who's responsible and has an understanding of the big picture, I think that's helpful. I don't think it's a requirement. I will say, in my experience, it's a little bit harder for an engineer to be a great product leader, in that there are some differences in the way people think. I've also seen product leaders who struggled on the engineering side. So I think in order to combine those, you need the right person, the right organization, the right approach. The things I'm talking about in terms of the functions have a lot more to do with how the teams work together and much less to do with the org structure.
So yeah, if the goal is to build real trust, is there a sure path to that?
There's a lot of books about that. I have a bunch of them behind me. I mean, I think there are ways to speed up trust. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that when product teams talk about the great things that they've delivered, so very often in an organization, it's the engineering team that's building the thing and the product team that's standing in front of the company saying, hey, look at the cool thing we built. I think that when a product team acknowledges that the engineers built the thing and that it was a team effort and that designers were involved and other people, like those things build trust, because it's not like I'm building it and someone else is out there trying to take credit for it. So I think that's helpful, right? It's not the product person who like on their own delivered this amazing thing. I think we need to keep that in mind as product folks and make sure that we're telling the whole story. I think that product people owning technology failures is important. I think being able to stand in front of the company and saying like, hey, like we made a mistake, right? Or I screwed this thing up, as opposed to like they did it. Pointing fingers is never helpful. Taking credit for someone else's work is never helpful, right? And I think those things are really, they're more common than you would think, because it feels a little bit unnatural to say like, yeah, it was a technology problem, right? Or something went wrong. Mm-hmm. And I still need to say, hey, this is not someone else's failure. This is a failure of the process. It's a failure of the prioritization. It's a failure of the amount of work that we had. Like there's a whole bunch of different things, right? And we need to own that. I think the more that people can own it on behalf of the capability, the easier it's going to be to build trust.
No, that's interesting. It makes sense, but it's interesting to hear from you that a lot of times engineering doesn't get a lot of credit, right? They're kind of behind the scenes, and when things go wrong, they get a little more visibility, right? As opposed to building the product. So that's an interesting dynamic, because it makes sense when you explain it, or you don't think of it in those terms.
Yeah, I think that stuff is really important.
Good.
I mean, it's the same thing, right? If you have kids and you say, like, if the kid does something wrong and you say, well, your mom is going to punish you, right?
That's what I said.
That respected. Thanks.
Please
have a book on trust for you.
It's a fair analogy, yeah. Heavily dynamic, yeah.
It hurts your credibility. It hurts your relationship. It's not good for anybody, right?
Yeah.
You need to be a team.
So I think a lot of times we try to throw process at this as a way to solve it, and really that might help, but I don't know if that's going to hit the core of the issue. So we often hear about frameworks like Agile or Scrum as solving or fixing issues like that. In your opinion, are they overhyped, Band-Aid, or are they going to fix it?
I think they're actually a different topic. You can apply a process, and if that process is applied without agreement, without trust, without organization, without, keeping in mind the way a team works, then the process isn't going to work. Agile is not going to fix a broken team. It's going to allow the team to operate in a consistent way. There are certain things built into it, right? I think daily stand-ups are a good way to make sure that people are communicating with each other, to try to make sure, I think, retros and blameless postmortems. There's a lot of things built into that process that I think could facilitate the right kind of relationship, but I have seen Agile teams that communicated terribly. So I don't think it's a fix.
So it gave us an example with Best Buy of flipping the script. I don't know if you have another example of where you've seen kind of product and engineering come together and what made it work.
I think Bluestem was one of the best. At Bluestem, I had a counterpart on the engineering side, Dave Micko. You probably know Dave. Dave is fantastic, and he and I were very much aligned on the things that were important, the way we were going to communicate, the way the teams would operate. We went from a company that was doing some version of Agile when I joined, but I would say it was fairly limited, and most of the company was still doing something more like waterfall, and we didn't have a product capability at all. We didn't have product designers, I don't think. And so, we worked together to build those things out, to show some early wins, to deliver things quickly, to create efficiencies. Over the course of a few years, we had accumulated all the best people in the company. The people who are the most excited to get work done and advance their careers all wanted to be part of our team. We delivered an enormous amount of value. When I started, we were doing something like $400 million in revenue. And when I left, it was about $2 billion. We had a new e-commerce platform that was supporting 13 brands, or on the path to supporting 13 brands. I think we got to maybe 6 or 8 before some of the brands. I would say it was just a really great, healthy environment. And a lot of us were still in touch, and we still talk about it. We're like, it's been 8 years since I left there. A lot of us still think of that as one of the kind of healthiest, most productive work experiences that we've had.
That's awesome. And there's a lot of companies out there that need that. So I guess one final question before we close the conversation. And hopefully it's not giving away too much from your consulting revenue here, because this is why companies bring you in, right? So
I am not worried.
Okay. So if there's one big thing companies typically, if there's one big takeaway, right? There's one thing that companies can change that's going to provide an immediate impact. What's that?
I would say consolidated goals. I think the goals is the most important thing. I think also there are companies that have technology roadmaps and product roadmaps. I think those need to be one thing. What we're trying to avoid here is having engineering carve off certain resources. We're trying to avoid engineering carving out people to work on tech stuff. When a healthy team is working, the tech stuff is just as important as the feature stuff. You don't want to be in a situation where your engineering team needs to carve out time to do engineering things and doesn't want the product people to be aware. And I think that happens because engineering has goals that product hasn't bought into, or because there are some long-term technology things that the company's not going to necessarily prioritize, but really have to get done. Transparency is incredibly important. I'm not a product and engineering leader who comes in and says, I know better than everybody else. You said one thing. So the one thing is goals. The second thing is consolidated roadmap. And the third thing is transparency. I think it's really important to have all those things.
The roadmap is really tied to the goals.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the transparency is in some way also, right? Like, can I count that as one thing?
I think it's all connected. If companies want to get a hold of you to help fix this, is it best to reach you on LinkedIn or website?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Lee Zukor.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. Reach out. I'm happy to talk.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, well, we're both thank yous. It's time.
Well, thank you both.
We appreciate it.
It's a total pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate it.